Welcome everybody, this is Grandmaster Alex Lenderman with the second part of the video series on the pawn chains. And now we're going to look at another of Grishuk's games to really demonstrate the point. And then we're going to move on to some other games. So e4, e6, d4, d5, and e5. And again, we're going to actually look at moves other than e5, which sometimes lead to this structure. c5, c3, knight c6, knight f3, queen b6, a3, c4, knight bd2, knight a5, so black played correctly, g3, bishop d7, and this is all theory. And in this game, Grishuk, instead of playing bishop g2, played h4, which is also a very interesting option. And here black played f5, and once again, this might be premature. The timing just has to be correct with it. And I'll show you an example when this is a good move. But usually, the thing I realize is whenever the bishop has a chance to get to this long diagonal, pressuring e6, usually it could be a little bit dubious as far as I understand it. I might be wrong though, but that's what, at least the appearance I get. ef, and now knight takes. Maybe gf was also interesting, but knight takes and knight e5. And again, we'll see if Vitsugov took with the g-pawn, and we'll see why knight takes is also not very desirable, because this knight on e5 is very, very well placed, and as you'll see, white has a lot of pressure along that e-file. Bishop d6, bishop h3, and here black decided to take on e5. Let's say he tried bishop c7, white can go queen e2, rook f8, castles queenside, and then taking on d7, and then, as you could see, e6 will become even weaker because black's gonna lose this bishop, and white will at some point get b3 in, and then c4, and now this king is very vulnerable. That was played in one game. Also, if black tries, let's say, move bishop c8, keeping the bishop, well then black's having a hard time castling queenside, and then there might be problems with simply the king finding safety for it. So h5, and then white again has a big initiative, because black king simply cannot find any good shelter. So black takes, knight g8. It looks like, again, black might be okay. He blocked the e-file, and then knight e7, and black's not going to castle short. Maybe he might castle long, and everything seems fine for black. But queen g4, very concrete move, simply attacking the g7 target right away. g6. And that's the only move. Otherwise, black's gonna have to move the king and castle short. And now, as you could see, the dark squares will be really weak. And white still, unfortunately for black, still has that dark squares. Knight e7. And now white played knight f3, knight b3, bishop e3. And of course, white does not want to exchange it. Queen c7, rook d1, and here black gets full control over that b3 score, so white's not actually breaking through with b3. So it seems like everything's safe. Black played h6, so just covering against any kind of bishop g5 or knight g5, h5, g5, so everything seems under control for now. Typical defensive idea for black. Knight d4. But the problem is white has another way to break through with f4. And knight takes, cd. Castles queenside. But even here, the king seems very safe. There's no b3 break, at least not right away, and everything seems fine. But the problem is now, white bishop has another avenue to go to. So black played knight c6, stopping that. Still everything seems more or less fine, closed for black. But fortresses often are not able to be maintained. And now white finally broke through with f4. And now white's gonna crash through on the king's side. Not the queen's side where the king feels comfortable, but the problem is that white has the space here, and on the side where he has a space advantage, that's typically where we want to break through, and white actually has two space advantages here. So unfortunately for black, he's not able to maintain this position. Not to mention that his bishop on d7 is only a defensive piece. And he played gf. His best chances maybe was to play knight takes d4, fg, knight b3, bishop f4, hd, queen g5, knight c5 with a little bit of a complicated game. So maybe white could have played a little bit better earlier. But after gf, rook takes, now black has too many targets, in particular e6 and h6. queen b6, rook f6. And that sacrifices the d4 pawn, but if black takes that, takes bishop a5, white wins in exchange, and it's much better. So therefore black had to play b4, ab, knight takes, and now bishop takes h6. Now this pawn on h5 is going to be very strong, knight d3, rook d2, knight takes b2. So black's trying to get desperately counterplay with the a pawn and the c pawn, but white's quicker. Bishop g7, and the problem is it's harder for black to push his pawns because his king is on that side also. Rook e8, h6, a5 and h7, and white's pieces are just too strong on this king side. a4, desperate counterplay, but queen f3, stopping everything. Queen already did its job here. Now the other pieces can help promote this h7 pawn. But in the meantime, prophylaxis first. Queen f3, queen b4, rook f2, c3, black's still trying, but after rook f8, white will promote the pawn, and after queen b3, I think he resigned here, but the point is that after h8, white's gonna just be up a queen, and the pawn on c2 will be relatively easily stopped. So, as you could see, even if the king does not get attacked, as in Vityagov's game, white can also break through on the queen side in a situation like that, even if the e-file is closed. So early f5 or f6 could be very dangerous, especially if that bishop on f1 is on that diagonal, where it puts pressure on this king side. So let's now see some examples of pawn chain from non-e5 variation. So now I want to bring you guys the attention the game between Malakhov and Shulman. And this was a game in the World Team Championship between Russia and United States back in 2010. And this game I really thought was very impressive from Malakhov's side. Because Malakhov, as far as I know, was normally a knight f3 or d4 player. But here he played e4 because he knew that Yuri Shulman almost always plays the French. So, and he concretely prepared a very interesting system here. d4, d5, knight d2. And there are a lot of moves here, certainly. But knight f6 is a pretty popular move, because white's main move, almost everybody plays e5. And now once again, we get this pawn chain structure. If black plays any other moves, like c5 or bishop e7 or de, or even some other moves, maybe knight c6, the position is more unbalanced. But knight f6 basically fixates the pawn structure, because besides e5, nothing else makes so much logical sense in a position like this. So white plays e5, knight d7, and now white has several ways to go, but the point is that the pawn structure is fixed, and people who are true French lovers and love closed positions very often go for knight f6, and that's what a lot of people recommend in their videos, as far as I know. So let's look to see how white handled this line. White played f4, logical, because at some point black will play c5 and start chipping away in this base. So white tries to create another base and to protect the pawn on e5. Black played c5 and white played knight f3. This is actually interesting because c3 is normally played automatically to protect the space, but here, as we could see, sometimes white can get by without committing the move c3, and there's actually a deep point behind it, as you'll see. Knight c6, knight b3. A very interesting move. He's not playing c3, and you'll see why. So here he's playing knight b3. It looks silly because black can just play c4, and he plays it, which is logical, and white suddenly goes back. Now you'd think, why in the world would you move the knight to b3 and then go back to induce black to play c4? But I guess what white really wants is for black to get that space advantage, but he cares more that his own pawn chain does not get disturbed. And he feels like now that he has his own space advantage, he really can use it very well. So this was actually a very nice idea. And the fact that white never played c3 means that if black ever wants to play on the queen side with b5, b4, this play will be much slower for black because white did not create a target with the pawn on c3. So this is actually a very, very deep concept that Malakhov came up with in this game. And I was really impressed. So b5, bishop e2. Now if queen b6 to attack this pawn, Do we play c3? No, we do not. We play knight f1. That's the point. We still defend d4, but we do not play c3. And after f6, well, how else are we going to challenge the space? Knight e3, fe, bishop e7. Now, eventually, white might be able to play c3, because maybe castles right away has some tactical problems, I'm not sure. Castles, b4, queen e1, bc, queen f5, bishop d1, rook f7, bishop c2, so the bishop transforms into a long diagonal. The fact that black castled right away, he kind of castled into somewhat of an attack. Although, quite possibly, this is a very playable way for black to play, because black gets a lot of counterplay. This was actually a game played. So possibly c3 is still better to be avoided. Maybe it's better to still castle, and then king h1, and then still play flexible. But possibly, this was still a better way for black to play. As you could see, it's very complex. Black played knight b6, knight f1, trying to improve the knight on d7, because he figured the knight on d7 has no other good future, so it's very logical. Knight f1. Now bishop d7 is played, knight e3, bishop e7, castles, queen c7, and bishop d2. And now black played a5, bishop e1, so he's still trying to play on the queen side. But now, consider that he already got all these pawns so far in advance. Here he got very ambitious, Schulman. Probably he should have just castled at some point, and after queen d2, a b4, bishop h4, even though white might be better, but it's still a game. Or maybe he should try to play a waiting move, maybe even f6 here. But he castled queen side, so I guess he thought, okay, there's not going to be much of an attack. But unfortunately, it's not just an attack. It's almost like now castle's queen side almost shuts down black's play on the queen side, and now white has almost a free hand on the king side. So while there's no immediate breakthrough, it's just that black doesn't have a good plan anymore. So white played b3, and black played a4, which was also not the best. A rook b1. Just keeping the tension for now. There's no breakthrough right away, so white just makes slow improvements. Black, of course, does not want to open up the b file, but white does it anyway. bc. And now bishop f2, knight a5, and white finally breaks through on the king side. So it's almost like a principle of two weaknesses. White has the space advantage here, and all open b file here. One b file alone will not be enough to break through, so white also tries to take advantage of a space advantage on the king side to open up another avenue to really put the hamper on black's defense. And maybe at some point trying to bring this bishop on g3 and play f6 and open up a diagonal here also. So you'll see how this was played out. Black played g6. If he tried to take ef after this and knight takes d5, now you see white's really crashing through. And now, as you could see, the difference, the king really becomes in a very poor shape. So therefore, black played g6, and now f6. It closes the game for now, but as you'll see, white still is able to break through with this idea knight g5 and bishop g4. And now, at some point, a sack might come. Maybe not right away, but at some point. Black just has a hard time defending both the airy king, the b file, and also his king side, which is relatively compromised. So black played knight c6, and then there it comes, knight takes e6, fe, bishop takes e6, breaking through and really taking advantage of, and now this pawn chain becomes a pawn mass, which is really going to overrun black. Rook d7, and now knight takes d5, takes, and queen f3. So white sacked two pieces, but now black's position falls apart like a house made of cards. So queen f3, and yeah, black has really no defense here, because if the knight moves, then the c6 knight hangs, and because of the weak king, these pawns, the extra pieces won't help. Not to mention, aside from that, the bishop is also hanging. So black tried knight d8. If he tried knight takes d4, this bishop takes, and bishop takes. So black played here, bishop takes d5, and now white has 3 pawns for a piece, but look at the pawns. Obviously these pawns are probably worth like a rook, if not more, and not to mention the weak king. So white is, of course, completely winning. Queen a6, e6 is another very nice sacrifice. Rook takes d5. Knight takes e6 was, I think, losing because takes and queen a8 is gonna crash through, followed by bishop here. It's gonna be pretty much mate. So he took, trying to desperately survive, but in reality, his position is lost. Now finally the bishop controls the b8 square, and slowly but surely, white's able to break through, and now the rook is lost, the pawn will promote, black throw in the towel. So as you could see, a weak king does not have to be exploited right away, but it's more of a principle of two weaknesses. You have to somehow create two weaknesses, and then at the right time, break through. So this is a very deep game, showing a lot of very nice deep ideas. And there's one more game I wanted to show, and that's between Stockfish and Houdini, and this is also e5. But still, it's good to see it, because here white played bishop e2, which is also an interesting move, bishop d7, and actually we'll also get a chance in the next video to see the game where the colors were reversed, and also Stockfish was able to win from the black side. So this just shows that in the French structures, Stockfish really seems to understand them very well. Rook b1, knight h6, knight f1, knight here, bishop f4, bishop e7, knight e3, knight b3. So here, white is gonna win in a positional way. Black once again covers b3, but white's able to trade the knights. And now this position seems almost dead equal. Seems like who can possibly break through. But this is one of these things which I think the computer really underestimated, Houdini that is. That black really, it's gonna be very hard for them to break through on the queen side ever. But now that this pawn on f4, f5, white's gonna have at some point a target. And as you'll see, this type of position is in fact better for white. Because even though this bishop on b3 looks nice, but in reality, it's just a pretty piece which has very little role. h6, bishop e3, castles, castles, rook here, king h1, and of course black's gonna play on the king side where he has the space advantage. And also there's this target on f5 which allows at some point files to be open. So for now he closes, but eventually computer patiently plays in a way where eventually he's gonna break through with g4 at the right moment. And again, all these subtleties, like little by little, just improving the pieces. And the good thing about computer games is that computers can really teach how to really maximize the use of the pieces. Like the computer uses his pieces in such a good way that it's incredible. We can't really learn calculation from the computer because it's just the human cannot possibly learn how to calculate very deeply. But the feel for pieces is what we really want to try to learn from looking at computer games. How it really optimizes all of his pieces. And we as humans, we just have a hard time doing that. Even at the GM level. h5, takes, and this bishop is still not great, but the g-file has been opened. And black has also some weaknesses. d5, f5, h5, and basically a5 was played, I guess, to defend the a5 pawn, just secured for now. Black played b6. I'm not sure why b6 had to be played, but I guess either way it's quite a difficult position for black. But he tried to play with a5 because of ab, then rook a7 penetrates. So a5, b7, h4. But this doesn't really hold well for black. And slowly but surely, white's able to break through. And there, black just resigned. So, as you could see, sometimes the computer can misevaluate a certain position from the beginning. Houdini, I'm sure, evaluated this position as fine, but he maybe did not sense the long-term danger that white does have a plan, a picture where he can break through, whereas black does not really have a good plan of breaking through. So whenever you go for certain structures, you want to try to understand if your play is easier than opponent's, and if you're going to have a clear plan to try to break through, and likewise, the same thing you want to think for your opponent. So I hope you guys enjoyed these nice examples from the white side. And next video we're gonna see some examples from the black side as well. So until next time, this has been Grandmaster Alex Lenderman signing off. Thank you for watching.